I was born on March the 16th, 1935 in a rural farmhouse. I was delivered by a Dr. Herman Schaefer. I was one of the few of 14 children that was delivered by a doctor. Well, my grandparents on my mother's side, Henry Knockmoose. The Knockmooses were from Germany, settled in a little town of West Salem, which was my hometown area. My grandmother was Minnie Evelyn Shear, and Minnie Evelyn Shear was from around a little bit north of the Richland County, Illinois area, was where her family grew up. On the Ahlfield side, my dad's parents, Frederick Heinrich Ahlfield, came over from Germany in the 1800s, and he settled in a little area outside of West Salem, Illinois in Edwards County. And my grandmother is Julia Anna Bain. Julia Anna Bain was from St. Louis, Missouri. My dad was the 11th child of Heinrich Frederick from Germany, and so he was the baby of the family. And my mother was the oldest child of Henry Knockmoose and Minnie Evelyn Shear. And I'm the youngest of 14 children born to Harriet Knockmoose Ahlfield and Edwin Henry Ahlfield. Well, the first thing that I can actually remember was outside our farmhouse in southern Illinois, and our furniture was being set outside the house by the road by someone called a sheriff. And I did not know what was going on or anything like that. It was just a complete shock to me, but it's about the first thing I remember. The mortgage on the farm, it was 20 acres, and it was the family farm. It supported our entire family, and it had been repossessed for taxes because this was in 1935. The money for taxes had not been able to be achieved from the farm, and the property was being repossessed to pay the taxes. Then I remember the changes of the next few years. It seemed like to go on forever. There was no actual security, I guess, at that particular time. There was a place available for our family to move into, the Headley house, but it leaked water so much that instead of going inside the house, we were moved into the loft of a barn. We lived in that area for quite some time. I don't remember exactly how long. And about the next thing that I remember was this same sheriff returning, and in their vehicle took my mother and me and two or three of the other brothers and sisters. There was Eugene, Jim, and I don't know if Enoch went along or not, but we were taken to Grayville, Illinois, to the county poor farm. When I was 6, we moved in town to West Salem because my grandfather, Knockmoose, was not too familiar with technology or anything like that, but he had bought a new vehicle and he had an accident and was hurt, and it killed my grandmother, and he needed care at home. And I don't know the extent of his injuries at the time, but he insisted that my mother come and take care of him because she, being the oldest daughter in her family and his family, had always taken care of him. So he gave us an old house in West Salem, about 2 blocks from where my grandfather lived. It was right at the edge of his farm, and so since that was the first place we had a chance of having a home instead of living in a chicken house, we moved into West Salem. My dad and my grandpa never did get along. My grandpa held it against my dad and accused him of taking his oldest daughter away from him, who was the person that always took care of him and raised the other kids too. So we had an opportunity to move into town in a house, and my mother and my sister Imogen and James and Enoch and I moved into town, and my dad would not moving in that close and under conditions by his father-in-law, but after about a month he gave in and moved into town also. Well, Imogen was the youngest next to me. She was basically the family member that I grew up with more than everybody else because we were closest to the same age. She was responsible for my education there early on because I wasn't old enough to go to school, but she went to a country school and she was pretty much a teacher. She would come home and teach me everything that she had had that day. And then by the time that I had got into elementary school, I already knew how to read and write and the numbers and that type thing. The next oldest brother was James, and his name was James Acey, and he was just next older than Imogen, and he and I spent a lot of time together, and even as we grown up, we have continued to spend a lot of time together. Older than James is my brother Enoch, and he is also a brother that I was always very close to and had a lot of time with. But a few years down the road, he was going to school at Olney High School and was working 2 jobs in Olney because there was really no family income, and this way he was making some money and always brought my mother some money from what he made from his jobs, etc., besides living in a rooming house in Olney. My brother Jim got a job working in Joe Graham's barber shop, sweeping the shop and maintaining the coal stove and the coal water heater and shining shoes. And of course I was hanging around with him. I was 6 by the time that we moved into town. The next year or even later that year, he got a job working in the movie theater for Neil Bannister. So he worked 2 or 3 nights a week running the projectors, and I would hang around with him there at the movie theater. But when he did that, he did not have time to do the work for Joe Graham and shine shoes and mow the yards that he was mowing. And one of the major yards was a Miss Farmer, who was a real nice old widow lady, and she had an old push mower, and her neighbor, Don Beatabanner, was a very respected gentleman. She had her neighbor to contact me and see if I would be interested in mowing her yard for her, because I had hung around with Jim so much and I had sickled the grass around the edges of just helping him. But she was such a neat old lady that when we get done, I think she paid Jim 35 cents for mowing the yard. And she always brought out a glass of milk and a homemade cookie. And I would always go with him just to get the glass of milk and the cookie, because those were fantastic cookies. But later on, Joe Graham stopped me also. I was going, I guess, into the restaurant, which was next door, and Joe asked if I would come and take care of his shop for him, because he knew I'd hung around there so much that I knew what Jim was doing and that I would be capable of the job. And Don Beatabanner had told him, well, he sure didn't have to worry about that. So anyway, it sounded really good to me. So I went ahead shining shoes for Joe Graham, and Joe was a great person, and a person that I really respected and looked up to for many, many years following that. When I first went to work for Joe and was going to be responsible for shining the shoes, he was quite a dedicated business person and farmer, and was certainly an educated gentleman. And he told me when I first went in, he said, one thing when you're working as a professional, he said, now, me being a barber, when people come into my office to get their hair cut, into my business, he said, they look at the barber's hair. He said, and that's why I always make it a point, being the barber, that my hair is combed and cut and trimmed very neatly, because then if somebody comes in and they see how my hair looks, they're probably more likely to be a customer and get their hair cut so that it'll look like that also. So he said, when you're shining shoes, when people come in and they look at the shoe shiner's shoes, if they're shined neat, then they're more likely to think that if they get their shoes shined, their shoes will look neat and shiny also. So he said it's always important for anyone working in a profession like that, the example that they set is what determines how successful they are at their business. And he said, I'm not telling you to shine your shoes today or anything like that. He said, in fact, I'll bet those are probably the only shoes that you have. And I told him, yes, they were. He said, well, we need some appropriate shoes for you to have on when you're shining shoes. He said, I'll call the store, which there was a market in West Salem, and you pick out a pair of shoes that you would like to shine and that fit your feet and everything like that. I guess he probably noticed that the shoes I had on were some that were hand-me-downs and were not too appropriate. But he said, you don't ever want to, feel ashamed of what you have. He said, that's not the case at all. He said, you don't ever want to be concerned there about something that you don't have. So he said, this isn't a gift. What we'll do, we'll take a penny out of every shoe shine that you make on Saturday, because that's when you'll shine the most shoes, and we'll put it in a jar, and then when we have enough money in that jar, we'll pay it back for the shoes. And it seemed like nothing flat that I had that jar filled with pennies. I started school at West Salem, and I was a little upset because my birthday came in March, so I wasn't able to start school until I was a full 6 years old. I felt I guess a little bit mad because my aunt, my Uncle Sam's daughter, Marie Gady, was the school teacher that I would have had at the country school. But since I wasn't officially 6 years old yet, I couldn't start. There was no kindergarten back in those days at West Salem. When Eugene would come home and we'd have school again, and she'd teach me the ABCs and numbers and everything like that. When I started in the first grade under Miss Mariana, in a lot of ways I was a little bit bored because the things that she was teaching I already knew. And I guess maybe it made me a little lazy at first, because from that time until upper level, I was not really all that concerned about grades. There was no such thing as studying at home at night because we didn't have electricity, we didn't have running water. None of those facilities were available. So study condition after dark would have been with a kerosene lantern, and kerosene was in very short supply since money was in very short supply. So I still, through the first several years of school, I didn't put forth too much effort. I didn't know, nobody really had told me that A's were important or something like that. I was always perfectly happy if I had a C, and I wasn't even too upset about a D. I did get a few of them along the way a little bit. As it got a little farther along, it got a little bit more important, and particularly when I got up to the age of basketball and softball and those kinds of things. A guy had brought a portable skating rink into West Salem, and I had the job of helping him set it up and made some pretty good money there. When he couldn't make it, he lived at Ollie, and when he didn't come down and open it up, I worked as a skate boy. Everybody had clamp-on skates at that time. They rented them at the skating rink. It wasn't where they had shoe skates and things like they had later. I guess I was 14 years old, because you had to be 15 to have a driver's license. And he had a 1936 Plymouth. And I didn't know a whole lot about cars that time. I really hadn't learned how to drive or anything else yet. He decided he had an opportunity to buy a much newer car, which he did. And he said, I'll just sell you that Plymouth for $75. And so I bought and paid cash out of the money that I earned from him to buy that 1936 Plymouth. And it was one that caused me to take a job at the Marathon station, because a lot of people had their oil changed immediately following the war, or 1945 or 46, in that area. They would get their car serviced and change the oil every 1,000 miles on those older engines. And so I went to work at a Marathon service station, and we serviced and changed oil on a lot of cars on Saturdays. So I kept a 5-gallon can, and anytime we would change oil and the oil still looked good and clean and everything, I'd save it in my 5-gallon can. Because my 36 Plymouth, it was usually like I wanted dollars of gas and fill it up with oil. And that last driving around I did, because I didn't have a driver's license, I didn't have any insurance or anything like that on it. I did know the state policeman that lived in the town, and he knew I didn't have a driver's license. He knew I didn't have any insurance, and he also knew that was the only transportation of my family that lived in West Salem. Well, I wasn't very old. In fact, I still just just barely 15, if that old, because it was right after school got out. And my brother Enoch said, I'm going to take our Aunt Alice to Wyoming. Her husband and son is there working on drilling rigs. He said, would you like to go along with me and see a little bit of the world? And he said he was going to stay. If he could get a job, he was going to stay, but that our uncle would be bringing his wife back to Olney. I thought, well, that sounded pretty good, and I talked to Joe about it. I'm not sure my mother was too fond of the idea of me going that far away, because she'd never been that far from home, and I guess my dad hadn't either. But she thought that, well, since her sister, my Aunt Alice, was going along, and that they would be going there, and that I could probably get a ride back with them, you know, if Enoch took a job in the oil field, because there was a big boom going on in Wyoming, and there was lots of rigs working, and they were always short of hands, roughnecks, working on the rigs. Well, I went along with him. He had a 1949, this must have been about 1950, 51, but he had a 1949 Pontiac. He let me drive a lot on the trip. It was a good experience for me. I never drove in a major town or anything like that before. And when we got to Wyoming, it was kind of funny because there were no places to stay. It was way back in Lynch, Wyoming, and there were like 75 or 100 different rigs, and people from Oklahoma and Texas and Louisiana and all around, because that's where jobs were in the oil field. There was a big boom there. And my brother got a job the first day. He went to work for Laughlin Brothers Drilling Company, the same rig that our uncle worked for, the day we got into town. My aunt stayed, my uncle, there was a little mobile home laying there that was vacant, and they could rent it for a day or two or so. And they rented that, and there weren't much accommodations on the inside, so that night my brother and I slept under the trailer. Then the next day we did some looking, and I had gone around trying to find jobs, but my brother didn't want me to work on a drilling rig because he thought I was only 14, 15 years old. He felt like it was a little dangerous and everything like that. He hadn't spent a lot of time on a drilling rig himself. Anyway, I went around to the companies and thought maybe I could get on as a roustabout, and the people that go lay pipe and finish up the wells and stuff like that, not working on the rig, and wasn't able to find a job that would hire me. They needed people, but they didn't want to hire me. But we found a place that was an old Army modular home, I guess you could call it, that had bare essentials in it in Edgerton, Wyoming. It was about 18 miles from Lynch, and so it wouldn't have been very far for my brother to drive, but he had rented that place. And when I got into Edgerton, Wyoming, though, there was an advertisement for wanting construction workers. They had a camp there that was another one of these houses, like an old military house that had been stuck together, that they had made into a bunkhouse, and they were providing, there was just like an Army bunk and this type thing for living facilities, but they were providing it free for their employees because they couldn't get employees. And I talked to the boss who was supervising the whole job. They were building a new highway. It seems to me like it might be Route 90 that goes through there. I'm not real sure. It was in Midwest Wyoming, just probably 8 or 10 miles from Edgerton. And he said, well, now how old are you? And I said, well, actually I'm only whether it was 15 or 14. He said, well, can you do the work? And I said, I can work as hard as anybody you got here and more. And so he said, well, I want you to go to work for me then. So I started work on a construction crew, and we were setting concrete forms, and they didn't have ready mixed concrete back in those days. It was just, we mixed the concrete. We had a scales on the job. My first job on the construction crew was, I was operating the scales, and there was a little tractor, a little Ford tractor with an end loader on it that would dump concrete into the scales, and I'd weigh it, and if there was too much in, I'd throw some out. If there wasn't enough in, I'd throw more in. And then after that, they would dump sand on, and the same thing with sand. Then sometimes I'd be up in the scales shoveling out some of the sand, and if it wasn't heavy enough, I'd be throwing sand into it, shoveling sand into it. And then I was told by one of the employees that it was my job to take 3 bags of cement and set on the mixer. So it was really a chore, because I would get the sand shoveled and the gravel shoveled, and I would run back and dump the cement into the mixer, and then run back and get ready to weigh another load and this type thing. And anyway, I did that all that first day, and well, I was really tired at the end of the day. And the evening after that first day, the dragline operator came to me, and he brought the boss and came to me and told me what was happening. And the boss said, well, it looks to me like you done 2 man's work today. And I said, well, how do you mean? He said, because there's another guy there, the one that told you that it was your job to dump that cement in there. It was his job to dump the cement in there, besides just operating the mixer. And so you were doing his job as well as your own. He said, I'm going to give you 2 days' pay because you did it anyway. You know, even though it was a lot harder than anybody else was working around. Well, golly, then after that, work was a little bit easier. I could do just the job of the scale person, and I had a whole lot of rest time in between. And I certainly had a good friend out of the dragline operator, and after we got the concrete run, when we were moving pipe and stuff like that around, he specifically asked if I would be interested in being a swamper for him. And of course the swamper, what they did was tie the loads together for him to pick up and move somewhere else on the dragline and then unload them. And he saw that I wasn't at all afraid of heights or anything like that, so he said, we can do this a whole lot faster. But we only worked 5 days a week, and my brother wasn't against my going on a drilling rig with him on his crew, and they were always short-handed, so his boss said, well, bring him on. So I got to work Saturday and Sundays out on the drilling rig on my brother's crew. I still had 2 years of high school, and I was able to save enough money out of working out there because I really didn't have much of any kind of expenses, just buying a little bit of food, because I was working, or I was living in the bunkhouse, and so I didn't have any rent or bills of any kind or something like that. The only little expense that I had was buying gasoline for my brother's car when I'd get to borrow it once in a while. So it was a nice treat. When I got back to Illinois, I felt very flush and very much you know, that I had some money in the bank and I could have a nicer car. So I found an opportunity to trade my car for a '46 Ford. So that was quite a nice car for a junior in high school to drive, and particularly in West Salem. I spent that last year as a junior at West Salem, and then I went to Albion after going back out west because my brother's brother-in-law, his wife's brother, and in the meantime, Enoch's wife had moved out to Wyoming also. And so his brother-in-law, Jack Muir, was 1 year ahead of me in school, and he graduated from high school that year. And so as soon as school was out, Jack and I left in his 49 Ford heading back out to Wyoming where Enoch was at. And at that time, when we got to Wyoming, the rig that Don Neely was the driller, was Enoch's boss, and the rig was all shut down. It was getting ready to tear the rig down and move to Utah on a camp job. So his driller said to me, because I had worked with for his driller on weekends, and that was every week because they worked seven days a week. The summer before, he said, you're old enough to work for me. He says, if it's okay with your brother. So anyway, he said, now I can't hire anybody right now because as soon as we get this rig stacked, he said, you can go to find you a place to live around Vernal, Utah, or Mighton, Utah, or Roosevelt, Utah, because they're moving the rig up to Peters Point in Utah, which is the highest point around there. He said it'll be strictly a wildcat well. There's not been any oil wells drilled around there or anything, and it'll be a brand new experience. He said once we get moved there, he said they're setting up, the company that we're contracted with for drilling this hole is setting up a brand new Airstream campground. He said there's going to be at least a couple bunk trailers that are all bedrooms, and then there's a dining room and a commons room and I don't remember what all else exactly, but it was a whole camp, and they were all brand new Airstreams and this kind of thing. He said when we get the rig moved up there, then I want you and Jack and Enoch to be my crew, my bottom crew, he said, and he had a guy that they just referred to as Tex, and that's really all I knew him by because he was from Texas, was the derrick man, and he and the driller had been together for a long time. So anyway, that was the crew that he wanted to take the whole crew because he knew there wouldn't be trained roughnecks up there. So Jack and I got settled in Utah pretty well, and I thought, well, it's going to be another week or so before they come out, and there's some oil rigs working outside of Roosevelt, Utah. I think I'll find out where their recruiting place is, and usually there's either a restaurant or a bar or something around oil fields where the drillers go to find roughnecks, and the roughnecks go to find jobs. So anyway, I found out which one that was, and there was an old guy in there that was a driller, and he was looking for roughnecks, and I told him, he asked my name, and I told him, I said, Herman Ahlfield, and he said, are you any relation to Henry Ahlfield? He said, Henry Ahlfield? I said, yeah, he's my brother, you know. He said, well, I worked for him as a roughneck when he was drilling on rigs like 10 years ago or some such thing as that. He said, when can you start to work? And I said, tonight. You know, what time do you go out? And he said, well, I'm working morning cruise. That goes to work at midnight, and then you get off at 8 o'clock in the morning. I said, well, I can be ready to go tonight. He said, good. And he said, I'm going to need one more. And I said, well, I got this brother-in-law. He's been out and worked some in the oil field too. Both of us got jobs on the same crew, and I told him, I said, now, we're supposed to go on this Laughlin rig, which is going to move up on Peters Point, and it's a 5-day-a-week job instead of a 7-day-a-week job like on a drilling rig. And they do pay a premium because you got to stay up there at the camp, but they also feed you and everything like that. And for a couple single guys like Jack and I, that's just great because they had a special deal where you work 12-hour shifts. You work from 12 to 12 for 2 weeks, and then you have a week off. So it still use 3 crews, but there's always one that has a week to go into town, do whatever they want to, and this type thing. He said, well, you let me know. He said, as much ahead of time as you can. He said, I want you to stay just as long as you will. And anyway, Jack and I stayed and worked for him until Laughlin moved that rig up. And then when we went on into we'd met a lot of people around Utah at that particular time. And he always held it against me, but at a little farmer's market out on the street, we'd stop and buy peaches and apples and watermelons and this kind of thing. And Jack ended up marrying her. And he always did say, he always held that against me because I went in there first and met the people in there, and then Jack came in and started dating that girl, and they ended up getting married. She was a Mormon girl. I think I worked my off week about every week, but maybe 1 or 2. That I took the time off to go to Salt Lake City and see the Great Salt Lake and a few places like that while we was out in Utah. Now, this was my very first experience because there wasn't anybody coming back to Illinois to bring me back. But I was going to be a senior at Albion High School at the time, and when I came back, I had, well, I won't say that I was wealthy, but I felt wealthy, you know, with all of the summer's pay that I had coming in, and it was my first time to ride a train. I could take a bus to Denver, and I could get the train from Denver to St. Louis, and then I could take the bus from St. Louis back to Olney. I went back and I enjoyed my senior year at Albion. And throughout that school year, I did have one distinct honor, I guess, because in Olney they have a big powwow dance. And the prettiest little redhead in the world at that particular time was also a senior in high school. And I was invited to be as her escort to the powwow, and she was the winner of the powwow queen. I knew it was just love at first sight. It lasted about half a dozen dates or so before it was time for me to go back out west again. Well, after my senior year, Stanley Greatline, who was always a good friend of mine, we were always in the same grade at school. He grew up in the country about the same place I did, and I and Galen Sluniker, the 3 of us were buddies. We went roller skating together and had a good time. So the night I graduated from high school, the 3 of us left in my black 50 Chevy. This was in 1953, and we drove to Denver, Colorado. We left at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and we pulled into Denver where we could see the lights at Denver at about 3 o'clock the next day. And he had an uncle who was a radio announcer in Denver. We spent a week at his home, then Stanley and Galen caught the train back on into St. Louis, and then somebody picked them up in St. Louis. And I drove on to Price, Utah. And when I got to Price, Utah, my brother's rig was just about ready to shut down, and Don Neely, my old driller, was ready to take an advance crew to Grand Junction, Colorado, for the first couple weeks, and this was hard work because it was way back in the sticks where the rig was going to set down and where we were going to be drilling. But there was a pretty good sized lake which they were going to use water out of, and I don't know whether it was 3 or 4 miles or what, but we went back as an advance crew to lay 4-inch water line from the lake to where the drill site was going to be. And those 30-foot joints of 4-inch metal pipe, laying them together with one person holding the end of it and then somebody else working with a wrench up on the front end of it, is hard work. And so for that 2 or 3 weeks, I was ready for a break. I spent the rest of the summer in Grand Junction, Colorado. Just at the end of the summer, we were finishing up the well that we were on, and they were going to move it back to Utah. Well, at that point in time, it was close enough to the end of the summer. I had my own car there, and I decided, well, it's time to check college. I was sitting in between the fence, I guess, as to whether I wanted to go to Eastern Illinois University or Southern Illinois University. And I had friends going both places. I thought, well, Eastern's registration day is a day or so ahead of time, and so I thought I would just go to Eastern and register in college. I hadn't made any advance registration plans or gone to see if I could be accepted or anything like that. I had a college or a high school diploma. I didn't know you had to make applications and things like that. But I got to Eastern, and boy, I didn't get very far, because the head of their recruiting and this type thing said, well, I'm sorry, you don't have in an application and you can't register at Eastern. He said, you can do an application and then maybe you could get qualified to come to Eastern after a quarter. They were on quarters then instead of sections. So I had some buddies in West Salem and Olney that were going to East Southern, and I thought, well, I'll just go down with those guys tomorrow and spend a day or so down there and look at Crab Orchard Lake and the places over and this kind of thing. So we were there. They had registrations and this kind of thing. Dr. Delight Morris was president of Southern at the time, and he was a very aggressive president and a very good college president. He was concerned about people, and he was interested in increasing their enrollment. And anyway, I was just there with a couple buddies. They were going through the registration line, and I was just waiting around here, and the guy that was registering them, after they got them registered, said, well, what do you want to take? I said, well, I haven't been accepted. I haven't made application. I can't be accepted. I found out from Eastern that I couldn't go to college in Illinois without having an application. And he said, well, around here the hell you can't. You can go, if you want to register, you get your ass over here and get registered. And that's just exactly what I did. And before I realized it, within less than an hour or two, I was signed up for classes and registered to go to school at Southern Illinois University. Golly, I found out when I got into classes, it wasn't quite like going to school at high school where I went to school, and I found out it wasn't quite as easy, and it wasn't where you could go in and sit in the class and pay attention to what the teacher said a little bit and then go in and take a test, pass the test, and you're fine. Well, I was registered, I was in class, there weren't any jobs. We ended up with housing. There were 13 male students living in the house. And it was unsupervised, and some of my predecessors had titled it the Royal Flush. Some of them were advanced students, and some of them were screen freshman just like I would have been. And it was very difficult, you know, because most of them had money from home or scholarships or something like that, and all I had was the money that I'd saved from working at Grand Junction. I was able to find a job working counter and grill at the Bus Cafe. There weren't many places to eat in Carbondale. The dormitories hadn't been built yet or anything like that. Anyway, I was driving home on weekends, and there were 2 or 3 other people that were riding back and forth with me from West Salem and Albion to Carbondale and back. And I went into the bus station because they had this counter and grill, and they had real good little hamburgers about like so, and he had up a help wanted sign. I asked him, you know, well, what does it pay? He said, well, he said, we got a lot of people here that don't have a lot of reserve money. He said, we don't pay money. He said, but we give you your meals free. So I thought, well, hell, that's one way. That'll save me $4 or $5 a day anyway. And he said, I'll tell you what, though. He said, if you work Saturday, I'll give you the price of your rent. And my rent then was $5 a week. Of course, that's pretty cheap, and I knew, well, I can pay tuition and my meals and my rent's free. I don't have any other expenses that I have to be concerned about. I did that, and then I picked up a job at the IGA store, stocking shelves, and I was picking up there, and it seemed to me like I was getting 78 cents an hour or some ungodly number like that, but that was some spending money. So on the way back, I stopped by my brother Jim was stationed. He was a career Air Force person. He was stationed at Chanute Air Force Base. And he said to me, well, why don't you take up education? He said, why don't you teach? Ain't no way in heck I would want to be a school teacher. I wouldn't want to put up with those kids. I said, I know how I was when I was in school, and I don't want to put up with people like me. But anyway, got to Carbondale, and I had a pretty good sack of money that I'd saved. I've been a little bit and had a good time too, but I didn't have a job, but I was sitting in the Varsity Theater. The Varsity Theater had a restaurant on one side of the theater. It's called the Varsity Fountain. I was sitting at the counter, and the manager of the theater, John Carruthers, was behind the counter, and he looked quite frustrated over a electric deep fryer. So he came around. The waitress was a considerably older lady that was there, who was in charge of the concession, and he told her, I guess you won't be able to have any French fries today. I can't get this deep fryer to work. And I had just watched him across the counter a little bit, and I was pretty certain of what was wrong with it, because it looked like the element was broken and separated right back where it fastens together with where it needs the power to run the heater for it. So I just told him, I said, well, if you want me to, I think I can fix that for you in just a little while. And he said, if you can, he said, I sure want you to. All I did was loosen the screw, take out a little piece of wire that was about 1 inch long, and stretch out the element and stick it back into the hole and tighten the screw down. And it was, I would say, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. And I said, well, be glad to have you try it now. And he tried it, and oh gosh, it's looking good, it's working fine. And he told the cook, he said, now I want you to give Herman whatever he wants for lunch. It's on the house, it's free. He said, do you have any other mechanical skills? And I said, well, I don't know. What are you talking about, John? He said, well, we got all kinds of things here. I have people that cut seats. College students will cut the seats, and we have to cover seats sometimes. He said, I got 2 custodians that come in after closing time, and they don't know how to fix anything. They do okay cleaning, but they don't know how to fix anything. He says, I have lights out on our marquee, and went through quite a list of things. He said, would you be interested in fixing other stuff for us? I said, well, sure. I said, I was looking for a job. I need something, you know, to make enough money to keep me in college. And he said, well, you'll sure, mate, you can get in, I'll guarantee you'll get in enough hours to pay your college. He said, your hours will be your own. He said, you pick the time you want and you turn in the number of hours you work. He said, you don't even have to explain to me what you've done on them. And he said, I'd like for you to come to work either tomorrow or whenever you want to, right away. It was very adequate to pay my expenses and things, and I continued each time. I was carrying, you know, half to 3/4 load. I wasn't usually carrying a full load. During my time working at the theater, I met my first wife. We went together for a while, and she was a home ec student. She was working, she wasn't in classes at the present time. She had less than a year to complete her degree, and she was working as a hello girl in a telephone exchange. So I got married, and then year and a half, 2 years down the road, Stan was born. I was still working at the theater. Then I was made assistant manager. I stayed there for quite a while because, like I said, in the meantime, I'd gotten married. I needed money coming back in and this kind of thing. It was a very pleasant experience. I was teaching 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I was principal, superintendent, and coach. I never went to PE class, physical education, and this kind of thing, but for my freshman and sophomore levels of school, I had to be coach. Well, I was also taking a class at SIU, and every quarter I made it a point that I took an additional class at SIU, regardless of what job I was working on, because I thought sooner or later, if I live 10 years or so, I will have a bachelor's degree. But I think I felt very inadequate because I had to go home and study history, or study English grammar, or study whatever. Every night before I came back, I had to study as hard as the kids did because I needed to stay a little bit ahead of them, I thought. Well, I stayed at Brunner's for a while, and I got a bachelor's. I transferred back over to the business department, but actually the business education department. So I had gone along and finished my degree with the business education department. Dr. Harves Ray, the head of the department, was my major professor. They wanted me to start right away on a consulting basis before the school year started, because the program would place the second year students into jobs. The former coordinator had not arranged to have jobs for them the year before. Didn't have enough jobs for all of them. They needed someone to start right then to have jobs for their student workers. And the jobs were set up to be paying. In other words, they weren't freebies. Those girls had a year of training, shorthand, typing, and machine skills, and were ready to start work. And to place them into jobs and to supervise them and worked with all the jobs. That was my assignment. We had a very successful things like the mistletoe ball and for the first time a celebratory dinner, bringing in all the supervisors from the different companies that had the girls and boys working for them. So by drawing in the community as well as the business, the individual business who down the road would be wanting to hire those people on a full-time basis, and many did. So I don't know why. It seems like I get stuck in a lot of different management things that way, because I got stuck as chairman of the faculty committee and other things pertaining to it, and I was asked for presentations and I was asked to give the major address to the Illinois Business Education Association meeting and it was at Effingham, Illinois, with all the business education teachers from the community colleges, the four-year colleges, etc. In addition to the assignments that I had at Wabash Valley, I was very cognizant of any grant applications where additional funding for the college and everything might become available. I had a representative from the coal company, Amex Coal Company, vice president, and told me that they were starting a coal mine, Wabash Mine, at Keensburg, Illinois, and that they would be employing up to ungodly high numbers of people to supply the coal for the new power plant that was going in across the bridge in Indiana. And the thing that they really needed and were really hard-pressed for was trained coal miners, not using a pick and shovel digging coal, but operating a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment, automatic coal mining operation. And they needed someone to teach the equipment, etc., to a prospective large number to meet the labor needs that were going to be moving into Wabash County. It was one of those things that my idea has always been is where there's a need, that's where you find a way to provide for them. Chuck Harrison was a vice president of Amex Coal Company, and Bierbauer was the president at that time. And he asked me, he had been directed to me by the president, Dr. Cox. We were asked to put together, and I set up an advisory council for a coal mining technology program and brought those people from industry, and others from industry were anxious to participate, as well as our electronics people and the other people that I felt like could be beneficial, as well as the central staff from Alney and the chancellor's office. We started the first coal mining technology program at a community college in the United States. Well, I left the college, okay, because I was on a salary. I could make more money as a grade school principal or a high school principal than I was making as Dean of Instruction at Wabash Valley College, okay. So the job as superintendent at Allendale was open. And in my job as superintendent at Allendale, which was a dual system, we had both grade school and high school, but I was making more money than I was making dean of instruction at the college. And I spent 7 years in the Allendale school system. One of the requirements in Allendale was to live in the district. No houses were available. So I put up a new house. The company, it was a modular home, the company had told me that they were looking for dealers. They wanted me to be a dealer and that I could get the dealer's price on my house if I would have 2 open houses. And I had an open house on it, and it's kind of funny because it turned into a profession. Allendale School had a superintendent that had just been fired. And there was a lot of disgruntlement, a lot of financial problems, and this type of thing in the district. And the board president and I were both on Special Education District Council, which covered several counties in this part of southern Illinois. So we was just talking on the way over and back, and he asked me what I thought it would take, to bring Allendale School out of their financial problems. And my thing was, there's no housing, you can't buy a house, this kind of thing on it. There's not enough students to increase our income from students. So you either have to increase the assessed valuation of the district, which increases the taxing base, and increase the number of students, which increases the state aid. 2 places that you get money from. And so he said, well, what do you recommend? And this was after I had built my new house, and I said, well, I would recommend that we need some more housing, and the Lions Club there had built a subdivision, but it didn't have very many houses on it, hardly any. So I said, well, Sam, what do you think about me building some houses? He said, I think it'd be great. That's what we need to get some money in to keep the district functional, above water, and this kind of thing. So I held on my first open house, I sold 2 houses at just an open house. The 2 houses brought in enough commission on sales of modular homes to pay for mine. So it just seemed obvious to me to go into business. I was making more money off of selling a couple houses than I'd make as superintendent with all the headaches and this kind of thing that goes along with it. Single for about 10 years, and I had been at Cornell about 6 years, and I was superintendent of 2 districts. They had a separate high school district and a grade school district. My kids were living in Olney and Evansville, Indiana, and I'm not sure, Joni may have been in Hawaii then. Most of them were in school. Stan and Kevin and Alice, all 3 got their degrees from college, and Joni had gone to college at SIU and then also many colleges in different other vocational areas and taught in special ed. So I still did a lot of running to southern Illinois. And on my way back one time, I stopped to gas up in Bloomington, Illinois. And I was looking through the paper, or I stopped to have something to eat, and I saw something, well, there's a singles dance in Bloomington. And I thought, well, what the heck, I'm going back to go to bed and then get up Monday morning and teach. So I stopped I thought, well, I'll just go to the singles dance. So I saw these two ladies that I thought were, sitting kind of by themselves and this kind of thing. And I said, well, I wonder if she would like to dance. So I just happened to ask her to dance, and she just happened to say yes. So when I joke to everybody, I say, well, she picked me up in the singles bar. It wasn't quite like that, but I still like my story about that the best. We danced, and we spent the bulk of the evening dancing with each other. As the Southerners say, about as pretty as a speckled pup, I thought. So I just told her, well, if you decide you want to call me, give me a call and we just chat sometime. And that happened. We discussed a date. It was 2 or 3 days later or something like that. And I was going to go to Clinton, where she lived at Clinton. It wasn't too far from, it didn't seem too far for lots of trips after that, it seemed like. But a day or so before, she called me and to cancel the date. She said, well, Mary, the buddy that she was there with, she said, I could set you up with a date with Mary if you want to. And I said, well, no. I said, I didn't see any reason to have a date with her. And anyway, a day or so later, she called me back and she said, I changed my mind. Can we still go out? And I said, sure, We were both teaching, and that was a big draw. And we both had a lot of similar expenses. We both grew up under similar circumstances. Neither one of us came from a big wealthy family or anything like that, or ever had anything come too easy along the way. After our first date, though, she said, I'm going to cook a Yankee pot roast for dinner tomorrow. And she said, I'd be welcome to come for a pot roast if I wanted to drive from Pontiac back down to Clinton. And I thought that sounded like a pretty good idea. And then, golly, it just seemed to progress from there. I met her kids. Her son was there for dinner, but wasn't too cooperative or didn't participate too much or anything. He was a teenager. Very shortly thereafter, I met Joey and Randy, and they were very friendly and cooperative and welcoming, I'll say, and this kind of thing. And Mary and I seemed to get along just fine. I had faculty meetings of the Cornell faculty come up and invited Mary to go to them with me because it was I always put together a family faculty appreciation meeting during the early spring as a teacher appreciation thing. She met all the faculty met her, and this kind of thing. And I won't say that there weren't other girls or dates or anything like that around, but the faculty said, well, we like Mary. They made it very plain that they like Mary, and well, she was a teacher. She was basically one of them from the minute that she showed up, and we just kind of got along that way. It was we went lots of places. We played golf. We went to Hawaii. We went on a trip that was quite enjoyable to South Dakota, to the Corn Palace, and Deadwood, South Dakota, yeah. And she got introduced to playing blackjack there. Will Van Welden was my former coach at Cornell School, and is a very good friend, both he and his wife, and have been, as well as most of the faculty from that school. And we still have association with many of them, and many of them were at Mary's 70th birthday party. Will and I played golf together a little bit, and I told him, well, I've been thinking about going back, taking another job. he said, well, why don't you go to Marseilles, because said they really need a superintendent over there. They're about to go under, their superintendent's quit. I said, well, I don't know, it sounds kind of interesting. I'll go over and look at it. And Will was working on the golf course on the other side of Marseilles. Could take his friends, in fact, like he could take me golfing there, and he did quite frequently. And we stopped at a restaurant in town, and there was a newspaper there. It was telling about the dire financial straits of the school and considering consolidation. And his comment to me, he said, well, Herman, that looks like that's something that's just right down your line. Because he knew I had it to happen at Allendale. I had it to happen at Jeff's school when I was superintendent there. I was really brought in for 1 year to solve a problem like that. I went down to the school, and I drove around the building. I drove around the town a little bit and this kind of thing. I went to the school, and Janice Ruger, the school secretary, was at the school, and she took me through the building and showed me, of course, the superintendent's office was downstairs next to the furnace room and the old gym and this kind of thing. And I understand that it was down there on purpose because there was a back door, and the predecessor for the superintendent there could get out of the school, get into his car and leave because he had a 4 o'clock tea time. I don't know that that's true, but that's the story that I was told. So I moved, I went in first off and heard everybody's stories and was introduced to several different people. And I told Janice Ruger, I think I would like to go ahead and submit an application for you, because I don't think your problems are near as bad as everybody seems to think. I think you have this school, each person here, a school has an attitude, and I think this one has a bad attitude. It has the attitude of being a defeatist. And as long as it thinks that it is on the brink, it's going to be there. I say it has many avenues that I don't think have been touched as far as trying to solve the problems of the school. I've seen them before. I know how to handle them. I think I could solve the problems for this school. I said, I think it'd probably take about 4 or 5 years, but I think it probably wouldn't take any time to speak of, but what we could have a balanced budget. Before I got out of town, she had called Bob Hornback, the board president. Anyway, I went for the interview. After the interview, I wasn't given an answer, but the board members that I was talking to said, well, could you be here for breakfast tomorrow morning at, I don't know, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock? They had decided on me, but they needed to negotiate, and they needed to personally talk to me. There was three guys that showed up, the 3 officers. We chatted, and we chatted about health insurance and benefits and this kind of thing. And I said, well, I don't want your health insurance. I'd want you to add the price of your health insurance per person that the faculty has to my gross pay, and I'll pay income tax on it. Otherwise, I said, nobody else pays income tax on it. I said, but that way, I already have my health insurance. Because I have it through, in that case, I could have had it through Mary, the same insurance that I had on my own retirement insurance. Okay, and I put some other stipulations pertaining to that, because they provided a life insurance policy. I said, if you'll take the amount of your life insurance policy of the average employee that you have on the payroll, and I want that added to my gross salary. And I said, and you've asked me to sign a 4-year contract. I said, really, now, isn't that pretty gutsy to ask somebody to sign a 4-year contract when you don't think there'll be enough money to pay me after December? They kind of grinned a little bit and said, well, yeah, that's right. He said, yeah, I guess that's got to be kind of gutsy. I said, well, I'll do you one better. I'd sign a 5-year contract. And they jumped on it, needless to say. I didn't expect to stay 5 years, but I knew that if they were on even keel, and I could pretty much call my shot as to when I wanted to stop and go back on to retirement. After they decided I was hired, I told the board secretary that I wanted her to have the bookkeeper give me the financial records for the last 6 years. And I went over things like the bus contract. Well, somebody hadn't been watching very closely, because the bus contract, when they would go to a ball game, the bus contractor was charging the district for bringing the bus over, driving like 40 miles to pick up the students and take them 6 or 8 miles to another town to play ball, and then bring them back home. And then they were charging students or the district for taking the bus back to that. They had done that for 5 years. 5 out of the 6 years it had been that way. That was just one of the little things. And then another one, like they were charging for the kindergarten, who only had half day, so they weren't even in session the other days, the other half days in this thing. And you name it, there was just all kinds of little things like that. Even things like their paper towel machines were very expensive, and you can go through practically every other item they had, even the interest that they were paying. In the back of my mind, I thought that the first place for us to start is money to operate on now, because they've already drawn out the bulk of their real estate tax money for the year, which they used to operate on all year long. And so they need money to operate on now. So it was so funny, because the second day that I was there, Kevin Hyde, a good friend of mine from First Mid-State, it's a bonding company, and I said, well, Kevin, I just had a feeling that you'd be by today, and I want to know just exactly how fast can you meet all the statutory guidelines to do a life-saving bond for me. He said, a working cash bond, and he gave me the statutory time and this kind of thing. This was in July, because I was hired in July for the job. Well, he said, won't have any problems selling the bonds, everything like that. And the waiting times that are a requirement for a school district on a working cash bond like this. And I said, can you guarantee me that I'll have money in the bank from you out of those bonds by the end of August, by the time my payroll comes due in August? And it was an absolutely, we can have the money to you, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but $3, $4, $5 million, a lot of money. The local bank bought the bonds, and the money was in the bank, and our treasurer worked at the bank as president. So we had a year's operating funds in the bank, and that was before school ever started. The executive secretary of the school administrator's office called me and said, Herman, I see you're at Marseille School. He said, what's your problems there? I said, well, over 50% of our students are identified as special education. He said, they're over-identified. I said, yeah, I know. We have a psychiatrist who's being paid a straight salary of over $70,000 a year. And he's identifying students so that he can keep his job, so that he can keep the salary that he's getting. We have a librarian who's been there for years. In fact, the library was named after her father or father-in-law or something like that. She's taking in over $70,000 a year, not teaching any classes. She's being a librarian for an elementary school. She's even asking for additional summer pay for putting the books on the shelf. And then early on I found out that she has 4 newspapers coming in. She's reading every one of them before she gets off of her ass and does anything. And she's being paid over $70,000 a year. Well, you can subtract those two and you're up over $100,000 in savings. And those are just a few of the things. There were others that were on the salary basically like that. Well, I can easily say that we were total 1 year's operation in debt to start with. Okay, that we were debt-free and had over $5 million in the bank in 2007 when I retired. Well, first, we always have a responsibility to live within the amount of money that we have coming in. It's just not really possible to honestly spend more money than we make. Also, the wisdom from Joe Graham, our actions create reactions. If we have a defeatist attitude, we'll probably be defeated. If we have a positive attitude, we can do positive things. We can do whatever we really set our mind to if we're willing to work hard enough, study enough to do it. Every little bit of education is beneficial, whether it's positive education or unfavorable, negative education, because a lot of times we fail. It's not bad sometimes to fail, because sometimes our best teachers come from failure. So don't be afraid to try something just because you're afraid you might fail at it.